Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ordinary Humans, Extraordinary Choices, a podcast about ordinary humans who've navigated periods of their life in extraordinary ways. The goal of this podcast is to show you that you can begin making extraordinary choices at any stage of your life to start making progress towards your dreams, and that you never have to accept that today needs to be like yesterday was. I'm your host, Vamsi, and today's ordinary human who's made extraordinary choices is named Andrew. He also goes by Tropical on Discord communities and in the League of Legends game. He's a 20-year-old marketing student based in Perth, Australia, and he is also a Masters tier player in League of Legends, which is the third highest ranked tier. So he's progressed quite a bit in his journey there competitively as well. Andrew and I had an interesting conversation about philosophy, marketing, life in general, and we found that we were both quite interested in exploring parenting, schooling, learning, and in general, just some contentious, controversial topics around how a society should be managed and what the best decisions to make to help a society grow and function well could be. After the podcast, Andrew was hesitant about the conversation we had, as the controversial opinions he expressed may not be ones that he believed 6 months from now or a year from now as he grows and changes his mind about certain things. So I told him that I'd be happy to take the podcast offline whenever he wishes and respect his wishes. And he was definitely a trooper in allowing me to record my first ever podcast and have this conversation on the record so that we could both get some much needed practice at conversing in public in that form. The other thing that I wanted to say about the podcast is just that it helped me realize how much I enjoy these conversations with people, and Andrew said he's happy to come back to discuss future topics as well. So you can expect potentially to see him back in the future. But for now, please enjoy this conversation with Andrew. And of course, if you have any feedback, I will post my newly made Discord community's link in the description, and you can join there. And there's a specific channel where you can post feedback, and I read every feedback message, and I'm happy to receive feedback. I genuinely appreciate it and want to apply as much as I can to improve each episode and make it better than the last. Without further ado, please enjoy Ordinary Humans, Extraordinary Choices. Okay, I've just started the recording.
Excellent.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of, I guess I'll go first actually. My name's
Mm-hmm.
Vamsi. So
Mm-hmm.
I live in Vancouver, BC in Canada. You and I met in a mutual League of Legends Discord.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you about the podcast I was starting, Ordinary Humans, Extraordinary Choices. And I asked if you'd be willing to be a guest once I had learned a little bit about your mindset, because I thought there was something exceptional and worth exploring there, even though you maybe didn't agree at the time. So
I
yeah,
still don't agree.
you still don't agree. Yeah, okay. So I hope over the course of this conversation, I can change your mind about that,
Uh-huh.
because I have a feeling you'll say some things that might surprise you yourself, potentially, if we get deep
Okay.
enough. Yeah. And I'll aim for about an hour total. We'll see if it's going longer and both of us are enjoying it and you want to keep going. That's fine too. I don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so just tell the audience, the listeners, where you're from, maybe what you do, just a little bit of background on you before I go into some deeper
Mm-hmm.
questions.
All right. My name is Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Online, everybody knows me as Tropical. Um, I'm from Perth, and I study marketing and management at Godin University.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And you
Mm-hmm.
also mentioned you like camping with your friends. Tell me about that.
Wow, I can't believe you remembered that. Yeah, I just I go out with my friends. We try to make it once or twice a year, one big trip where everyone comes along. We go forward driving, camping, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
And the way you described that is, it seems like you and your friends like to have deep philosophical sort of discussions and disagreements over the campfire.
100%. I think I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of that sort of stuff, and I think I bring it out of people around me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I in 12 Rules, one of the things that I remember reading that stuck out to me was that when they were talking about Jordan Peterson, they said the gap between talking about the weather and then going into deep and meaningful conversation was often very, very little.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was very good at segueing the conversation into, from useless small talk to something interesting. And I think that I'm pretty good at that as well.
Interesting. That's definitely something I can relate to because I find that my high school friend group, I've been friends with them since high school, last 10 plus years, and it's
Hmm.
very much the same. I tend to bring that out in people just by the questions I ask and the topics I bring up. Uh,
Yeah, and I think that people are more interested in making that sort of conversation anyway. They just don't know how to start it off usually.
right. So maybe that's the first extraordinary choice we can talk about
Okay.
because it sounds like you do something that your friends do not do. So
Yeah.
how do you
I
think
mean,
you
it's
bring
not
this out?
exactly uncommon though.
Mhm.
What was your question?
Sorry. So how do you think you bring this out, or what is it that you do? So I agree, it's not super uncommon because we both have it in
Mm.
common, but I think it is extraordinary within your circle, right? So what is it
Hmm.
that you think stops your friends from doing it? Because they clearly want what you're bringing to the table, but they're not doing it themselves.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Um, maybe it's a focus on everybody is able to bring out that deep and meaningful conversation when it comes to talking about themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't mean this in any disrespect, but maybe it's that everybody is too focused on what they have to say that they end up forgetting to ask other people what exactly they have to say as well, and taking an interest in hearing the stories from the people around you as well.
Hmm. Let me think about that.
Um,
Hmm.
do you agree? Like, I think that a lot of people just end up focusing on what they have to say and the story that they want to share, and then they forget all about actually asking the other person or focusing on what it is the other person has to say, and taking a genuine interest in that. I'm not saying they don't, but sometimes you focus so much on what it is you have to say because you don't want to look stupid.
Hmm. Interesting. Or you're passionate about what you have to share that you lose consciousness or focus on the fact that it's a two-way conversation, not a one-way conversation.
Yeah, I think the book that I was reading recently, what was it called? How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Hmm.
Have you
Dale
heard that one?
Carnegie. Yeah, Dale Carnegie. Yeah.
Yes. Um, it talks about the idea that everybody is focused so much more on what it is they have to say, and they tend not to listen nearly as much as they should.
Mm. It's it's funny. The book I'm reading by Kate Murphy. It's something about what I'm not listening to, or how to listen better, and what I'm missing, and why it matters. Right? Because she's a
Hmm.
journalist who has been listening professionally for years, and she dug into the research to try to learn how to listen better.
What did
And
you say that book was called?
let me actually get the exact name for you because I just
Yeah.
paraphrased it.
Hmm.
One moment, I will look it up. Okay, it's called "You're Not Listening: What You're Missing and Why It Matters," and I'll put a link to both of the books we just mentioned in the show notes of the
Hmm.
podcast. But yeah, in the very first chapter, I haven't gotten that far into the book, but in the very
Hmm.
first chapter, she actually already addresses a misconception I had about what good listening is. So I thought good listening was basically being quiet and paying full attention to what the other person is saying and giving them the most space to talk. Um,
Hmm.
and that's partly true. Like I've noticed in this conversation, I've interrupted you once or twice already, and it's usually in the gaps of silence where you're able to really express yourself. But also, the questions that I've asked and the stories that I've shared are an important part of crystallizing or helping crystallize your thoughts and direction to share more deeply, what you
Yeah,
want to.
absolutely.
Hmm. And
I
that's
know
what she
you're a
talks
big
about.
fan of
Mhm.
interrupting people, of of encouraging others to interrupt you and interrupting others because it helps the flow of the conversation.
Sorry, you're mentioning that about me or yourself?
I think that you are a big fan of encouraging other people to interrupt you
Mm.
when you're talking because you think that it helps in um, the flow of the conversation. And from what it seems that you don't really lose your train of thought, or you said to me that you generate a new train of thought, and it doesn't really matter at all.
Yeah, I remember that was in our first conversation off the
Hmm.
record. I remember now. Yeah, I mentioned that. That's something an old colleague also taught me. He was one of the first people I met who seemed to like it when I interrupted him because most people
Hmm.
don't like being interrupted.
Of course,
But he enjoyed the way I did it, I guess, because he said that I was never interrupting him for selfish reasons. He said he felt I was
that's right.
interrupting him to build upon what he was saying or to
Hmm.
redirect it or to give him information that he would have wanted to know before he said the next thing.
That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of people interrupt. Well, when they get interrupted, they feel as though the other person is just doing so because they feel as though what you're saying is not important. What they're saying is.
Mhm.
So a lot of people feel offended when that's generally, well, not generally, but
Mhm.
often it's not the case.
It makes sense. Yeah. So it's about the mutual respect in the conversation. Why do it's like, what is the reason that I feel I'm being interrupted? Is it productive or not productive? Is it coming from, you know, them not being aware of something or, I understand. Yeah. In our case, I guess to pull the conversation a bit back to this idea of what you do that your friends don't do, you
Hmm.
mentioned a sort of, I'm trying to figure out the word for it, maybe a self centeredness, which isn't a bad thing. We're all self centered, we're all the center of our own universes, right?
Hmm.
We have to make a conscious effort to empathize with others or to put ourselves out of our shoes sometimes. Otherwise,
Yeah.
our default mode will be, what am I feeling? What are my sensations? It
Yeah.
can't really be helped.
Hmm.
So there must be some extraordinary choice that you are making on an ongoing basis that leads to you taking a genuine interest in other people and then spurring that conversation that doesn't end up happening unless you ask those questions that you do.
Um, I mean, I think if you ask anybody who has a quality like that, they won't tell you that they're consciously thinking about it or they're making a conscious decision
Mm.
to behave that way or to do things a certain way. Um, I, I mean, for me, you ask me, why it is that I do what I do in this regard. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be able to answer your question. I would say, oh, it's just the way that I am. And so I wonder if it is rather than it's being conscious decision, it's just something subconscious.
Fair enough. Yeah. We could probably explore that together at some point in this conversation because I'm a very similar way. And what I would end up doing is probably asking you questions about how you were as a child, right? Because I was very curious as a child. I asked lots of
Hmm.
questions as a child. I
Yeah.
enjoyed learning. And actually, people hated me in school because I asked too many questions. So the students and teachers alike would roll their eyes. I remember in boarding school, they even instituted a 3 question limit for me. I was allowed only 3 questions per class because I was
What?
asking too many
That's
questions.
shocking.
Yeah, but
Okay.
yeah,
I feel like that's totally wrong. As a teacher, you're basically just you're putting a limit on how much your students are allowed to learn. I feel like every child is questioning everything because they understand so little and they want to understand more. It's like embedded into the code of what makes a child, right? Like they're constantly learning from their surroundings. That's why babies put things in their mouths all the time.
yep.
So that just seems really cruel to me that a teacher is stopping a child from learning, doing the very thing that makes the child them.
It's funny because if you could see my face, you'd see me grinning because
Hmm.
I agree with you. But I also over time, so at the time I was very frustrated and angry with the rule. But
Yeah.
I kind of lashed out by asking 0 questions. Right, I went the
Uh-huh.
complete opposite way, and then they removed the rule after a few days. But the funny thing to me is that Now looking back, I can kind of understand where they were coming from, because my questions would lead the class on tangents. It would take us off curriculum, and I could see how from their perspective it was hurting the educational experience of the other students, right?
I still feel like there's a more elegant solution than just
Of course.
banning questions. I think
Yeah,
that they
of
could
course
have
there's going to be, it could
focused
be
more on.
mhm.
Go ahead.
It could be more one-on-one time. It could be finding a way to take the tangent back to the curriculum, link it back, and create a more engaging way. Because it's not like the questions were uninteresting. It's more that
Exactly.
I did realize that the reason the students rolled their eyes, though, is because the questions I asked were not questions that would show up on a test. So it felt like a waste of time to them, because they were there for the grade. They were there to
Yeah.
get the highest grade they can get and do well on the
hmm
test. Like a common question I heard them ask was, "Will this be on the test?" That,
Yeah. Okay.
but that was never a question in my mind.
But it's not even like I wouldn't even blame the students for that because it just seems like that's the way that the system is designed.
Right.
And I I, I really don't want to criticize the educational system for that because honestly, I don't know what you could do to fix that.
Hmm.
But I definitely agree, and I hated it, especially as a kid, that you couldn't just learn for the sake of learning. You had to learn for the sake of being tested, and then often that wouldn't even be um, it wouldn't even result in learning. So you know, I'd sit a test, even in uni. You'd do a unit, and then someone would ask you, "Okay, well, what did you learn?" And I started training myself after that, after uni, after high school, sorry, to start, being able to consciously answer a question like that.
Hmm.
But I feel like it's like the kid that goes to school and comes home, and then they say, "Well, what did you learn? What did you learn at school today?" And the kid doesn't know how to answer.
Hmm.
It's like, what have you spent the whole day doing? And it's like it is supposed to be learning. The answer to the question is supposed to be learning, but often it's more just the ability to regurgitate the information that they teach you, um, rather than actually learning it.
Yep. So my boarding school was in India. I think I was about
Okay.
maybe 11 to 12 years old at the time. And I remember they took us on a field trip once to attend a kind of convention held by other,
Yeah.
like, younger students. So I think there was like
hmm
a 7 or 8 year old girl at one of these like science fairs. And I remember they had a display of like a computer, and she basically said, "The CPU is the central processing unit." And I asked her,
Okay.
"That's interesting, but what does it do? How does it work?" And she looked at me for a few seconds, staring blankly, and then she said, "The CPU is the central processing unit." And I was like, "Wait, what?" Like, I asked the question, but I just got a definition repeated back to me, or like,
hmm
and that made me realize that's all she had been taught. Um, she did not know any more than that. And
Of course.
contrast that with a researcher, Sugata Mitra, because he legitimately he also worked in India, and he started an experiment where he would put a computer in the hole in a wall next to a village, right? Because he had his company building like right by a wall next to a village, and this village was like rural, and they had basically for many generations never even learned English. And he found that children started to gather around the computer and use it with the touchscreen and start to learn from it. And no,
hmm
there was no adult, there was no teacher, it was just the computer and the children. And they started to help each other and mentor each other. And then he replicated this experiment in multiple villages across India. And what he found was that kids could literally teach themselves English. They could, he would come back in like 6 months and visit a computer he had left somewhere, and he would find that the students, or the kids, had basically read through the whole entire like encyclopedia that was on there, and they were asking like, "Hey, we need more information about this, neurons and how they work, because it doesn't go deep enough." And he was
That's
like,
so
"How did you
cool.
even learn English? They didn't even speak English, 6 months ago."
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, they literally taught themselves English. They learned how to work it. And so he expanded that experiment, and he's looking at. So you asked, how do we innovate on education? I think he's one of the people doing it. And the
Mm,
answer he's found is you let people teach themselves, right? You let people teach each other and themselves. Rather than having an authority figure telling people what to learn, you let people
yeah.
learn based on what they're curious about,
hmm
and they will be able to go much further, and much faster.
Um, But you can also counteract that argument
Mhm.
and argue that let's say in the context of a community of children,
Right.
the older children will mentor the younger
They
children,
did
and
do
so
it.
there is still an
Yeah.
authority figure, right?
No, they're not doing it based on authority though, because sometimes the younger will teach the older something, right? They're not doing it based on like, do it because I'm older,
Right.
because I say so. It's more so
Mm-hmm.
because, uh, hey, here's an explanation. Here's why it makes sense. It's like peer mentoring, right? Like if you teach me something in league, it's not
Mm.
because you're older than me or that you're higher rank, right? It's that it makes sense to me and I will argue with you, right? And sometimes I might teach you something in league because,
Yeah.
and Coach Cupcake has said this while coaching me in league. He said, he feels like he's learning as much as I am, if not more, from the process. And I think that's
Oh
what
wow.
good teaching relationships look like, where the teacher is learning plenty from the student.
Mm.
It's not one way. But I think, unfortunately, many school systems are not designed for that level of interaction. And I don't blame the teachers because they're often given 30 plus students, right? So there isn't time for individual attention and getting to know someone.
Of course. Hmm.
Yeah.
But even in a group setting, I think that you can harness that mentorship and teaching, learning as a collective rather than learning individually. But which is what the children that you were saying in that story did.
Mhm.
Um, but I wouldn't. Sorry, I wouldn't have the slightest idea of where to start with a problem like that. How do you encourage a collective to teach each other?
Well, Sugata Mitra is actually doing it in classrooms where there are teachers, but the job of the teachers is not to directly tell people what to learn or how to learn. It's rather
Mm.
to help students with problems that they themselves have. So the teacher is more of a guide. So
Yep.
Karl Popper, the philosopher, he actually had a theory on this. He he made two analogies. One is the bucket theory of knowledge or the mind,
Uh-huh.
and the searchlight theory. So basically, the bucket theory, he explained it as what most educational institutions follow in their pedagogy, which is that a student's mind is like an empty bucket, and you put knowledge into it, and they learn. Right? It's
Okay.
the searchlight, however, is more like this. The student's mind is an active entity that is seeking out information in the darkness. It's like a searchlight that's panning around illuminating the darkness based on what interests it and its curiosity.
Mhm.
And the teacher's job is to help guide the searchlight towards
Mhm.
better ends, but also to help explain things that the searchlight shines upon, right? Help the student understand what they're interested in. That
Yep.
so from the searchlight philosophy, the questions I was asking as a child would make the teacher curious about how they can help me, how they can connect my curiosity and questions with the curriculum that they want me to learn by the time I'm 18 or whatever, right? Um, Rather than trying to force knowledge into the bucket, the idea is with the searchlight theory, it's the student who has to create the knowledge in their own mind, basically. And the
Mhm.
teacher can only help them do that. And I think that's how I view knowledge. It's that nobody can do your thinking for you, nobody can tell you what to think. You have to think for yourself. And all they can do is maybe give you inspiration, direction, guidance, but you have to do the final thinking yourself and the conclusion forming in your head.
Mhm. Uh,
So with kids, it's the same.
e
Yeah.
I do think that,
Hmm.
there's merit to both theories, though, like,
Okay.
and obviously, like, you it's way more desirable to have, um, children or anybody wanting to learn, thinking or behaving within the searchlight analogy
Hmm.
because you're going to learn more effectively if you're searching out the information yourself, right? I mean that's something that we've learned.
Hmm.
And what else? Uh, you'd be able to learn more effectively. You'd be more motivated to learn, which would make you then search out information on your own outside of the context of the classroom.
Hmm.
And it would just make you a better at whatever it is that you're learning. But I also think that motivation plays a big role because uh, often children are unmotivated. People within, I remember my time in high school, I didn't care. I put the absolute bare minimum in to get into the course that I wanted to
Hmm.
because I just hated everything. I hated what I was learning. I hated the system that I was learning it in, the
Hmm.
context, and so I feel like even though I didn't want to be the bucket analogy, I felt like that's how I was, and I was just rocking up and learning whatever the teacher was saying and not searching out information. Not though I did argue a lot with the teacher because I disagreed with things that they said sometimes. Um, I feel like I was often demotivated to do it just because I thought, well, what's the point? I don't actually care about what I'm learning, so I don't have any motivation to question because I whether or not what I'm learning is right or wrong. I don't really care. I'm just here to rock up and leave,
Mm.
which is super sad when you think about it. But I also, it was the reality for me and so many other people, and I still think it is the reality for so many people, especially in high school.
Hmm. It is. It was the reality for me. And I remember even in elementary school thinking to myself, I had this weird thought that I want to get out of school and change the system. But
Yeah,
I realized I had the second thought that was probably the more insightful thought, which is strange for me to have at that age, which was that once I get out of the system, I'm going to be so annoyed with it and wanting to be so done with it that I will
you don't
not
want
be
to go
willing to
back.
go back and change it.
I had the exact same realization. I remember my mom telling me that when I was in school that I used to tell her all about how I wanted to change the system and
Yeah.
do things differently because she could tell that I was so bothered by it and the way that it worked.
Hmm.
And I had the exact same realization as well. I was like, once I'm out of it, I don't want to go back.
Right. And this is probably why many systems don't change, because it's almost like the pain that motivates you to change a system is also the pain that is gone once you exit it. And then once the pain is
Hmm.
gone and you're back in comfort and you realize how good it is outside of the system, you don't want to go back to immersing yourself in it and empathizing with it and solving it for all the people who are
Hmm.
suffering in it. But ultimately, the people who make such a big difference are the people who do that anyway, right? They come back and they change the system. They try really hard, even though they might fail, even though it may not benefit themselves to do so. They try, um, and I have a lot
Yeah,
of admiration for
absolutely.
those people. But yeah.
Yeah, I think historically that has been the case though. So it's interesting to me that
Hmm.
though the classroom has evolved a lot, especially like, since the beginning of classrooms, but
Hmm.
um, more or less, there's so many similarities, and I feel like for a system that's so blatantly inefficient or ineffective, um, to be around so long, especially in the day and age that we live in, where if anything is wrong, people will question it. Um, it's crazy to me. Um, I'm not saying that I'm not in any way faulting people for not changing it. I'm just um, I'm surprised that it hasn't been changed.
Right. So what was the origin? It originated in Prague, right? This kindergarten system, like garden of children. This idea of creating good factory workers through a schooling system that teaches them basic skills so they can go into the workforce and be productive members of society. But ideally, you don't want them too smart, right? You don't want them too critically thinking because they still need to be good blue collar workers. That was the original intent. Then it evolved a little bit with universities coming in and being more available and common. But I'd say even in universities today, critical thinking is um, not always what is prioritized, or even when it is, it's mixed in with a lot of groupthink, unfortunately,
Yeah,
especially in the US. I know there's a lot of politicization and tribalization in university culture, which is unfortunate. It ends up becoming a place where free thought and free speech is suppressed rather than encouraged. Um,
what is tribalization?
I would say tribalization is this idea of towing the party line in politics, at least. Tribalization is when, so if the Conservative Party, and this is sort of unique to the US because it has a two-party system, right? Um, if the Conservative Party has a certain set of ideas and ideals and morals, then the idea is that if you are aligned with them, you should, for the tribalization makes people feel that they need to agree with all of the ideas of the Conservative Party, and if they agree
Right,
with
so
some
it's
of
kind
the
of
conservative ideas and some of the, say, liberal ideas, then they feel torn between the two and not they don't feel like they have an identity or a tribe, right?
yeah, I
They don't belong.
understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want to belong to your tribe. You want to stay safe. And yeah, it's kind of
Do you
hard.
know what's really
Mhm.
interesting? I've got a bit of a
Uh-huh.
bit of controversy to talk about now,
Sure.
but you reminded me of this. I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw this post that showed it was about ChatGPT, and
ChatGPT, right? Yeah.
it was about uh, it was about the way that it reacted. I think it was teaching information about
Hmm.
the Conservative Party and about the Liberal Party.
Hmm.
Forgive me for my lack of knowledge on the American politics
I'm
system because
Canadian,
I'm
so I don't
Australian.
have much knowledge either, right? This is all stuff I've
Okay,
gained through the internet, just like you. Yeah.
right, yeah. So it seemed like it was refusing to give information about the Conservative Party
Hmm.
because it said that it like violated its terms of um,
Right.
somehow reporting on harmful topics,
I
and
understand.
so it was saying that
Misinformation and things like
it,
that.
it was essentially saying that if it was discussing information to do with the Conservative Party, it would be teaching people about a harmful topic. I
Right.
think,
Yeah.
um,
That's very plausible to
which
me.
is
Yeah.
which is crazy, right? Like, um, to well, what they were accusing the creators of ChatGPT, OpenAI, of doing is essentially programming, quote unquote, programming the human race to fit into these square peg, square hole mentalities and ideologies, because it would make um, the programming, it would make things like AI and programming easier if people are fit into categories, because diversity is obviously harder to predict.
Okay, that's an interesting consideration that didn't come to mind
Yeah,
for me. That okay, we need to group people into cohorts or buckets or personas because it's then easier to have a machine learning AI classify them and group them more effectively to make decisions. I
right.
didn't.
Well, it's all
Yeah.
based on predictability, right?
Yes.
In an AI context, I believe.
Well, to some degree, yeah. It's based on trial and error and pattern recognition, and
Hmm.
l- g- getting feedback in some form that it needs to be able to measure and know, like, did I do a good job with this answer or a bad job? And
Right.
it can't do that unless people are submitting feedback. So the way it does it is by judging, you know, that's kind of where researchers have to come in and kind of help it, or people have to give it feedback. But just to
Yeah.
take a step back for a moment, for any listeners who are not familiar, ChatGPT is a machine learning, basically a chat bot. So online, you go in and you type to this um, software, and it will respond back to you with answers. And the idea is that it's become very popular lately because it is quite realistic and it can answer questions like how should I schedule my day, what kind of exercises should I start with to learn weightlifting, how should I learn League of Legends, teach me the introduction to philosophy, things like that. So it's much more detailed than Google. Google can only aggregate search results across the web. This machine learning algorithm can actually create custom responses for you. You can have it write you a poem based on a specific topic, and it will write a poem that is actually pretty good. It can write, short stories, things like that. So it's surprisingly effective. And in a way,
So,
it may even pass the Turing test in some instances where people feel that they cannot distinguish it from a human being if they just see the response compared to a human response.
I don't know much about the Turing test. Can you shed some more light on
I'm not super confident. So AI research is not my specialty.
that?
Um,
Mm-hmm.
my basic understanding of the Turing test, because I think what it actually is more complicated than that. The definition of the Turing test, the technical definition. But the
Okay.
way I think about it is just basically that can this AI pass for a human? Right? If you ask it a certain set of questions, and there are AI researchers who specialize in breaking AI, which is to say they will go in and they will ask edge case questions of like orange versus green. There are like interesting YouTube videos. I can link you some after this, but
Yeah. Okay.
like, and then the AI will fail because it does not know how to process those edge cases. It does not, it's kind of like trying to break a game or find bugs in a game.
Mm.
But for the most part, like ChatGPT, with a lot of the questions you ask it, it will pass for a human to most people, to many people.
Wow.
Um,
That's incredible.
which is, but I do have some controversial opinions on AI and artificial general intelligence. So the distinction there is just that Artificial general intelligence is what I would consider basically human level AI, which is to say,
Hmm.
it is a person, it is sentient, it is self aware, it can feel emotion, it has a mind, it is creative, it can create new knowledge outside of its genes. So that we're nowhere close to that, in my opinion. And machine learning is not some progression step towards artificial general intelligence. It would take an entirely different philosophy and algorithm to get there. But I will say machine learning has its own benefits, right? It makes for great, like I would call it dumb AI, basically. It would make for great assistance, like a calculator, right? It can help
Hmm.
you solve tasks. It could help doctors make better diagnoses, right? Like IBM's Watson AI was found to be making more
Yes.
accurate diagnoses than actual doctors. And that's because AI can process information so much faster and quicker and better than human beings. But of course, it doesn't have the creativity, right? So it's a trade off,
Hmm.
which we're happy to have.
Yeah, so it's essentially just at the moment, machine learning is just purely based on, well,
That's a
machine
great
learning
question.
is just based on productivity.
Sure,
That's the ultimate goal, right?
sure. Yeah.
Everything is to do with
How can it
productivity.
solve problems? Yeah. But if people think that we should start consulting um, machine learning to figure out, like, I don't know, moral problems, or like who should I marry and why, stuff like that, it's I think they're going to have a bad time. They can use it for perspective, right? To guide, to help them inspire some of their own thoughts, but
Mm.
ultimately it's not creative in the way that we think, or in the way that creativity should be thought about, I guess, is what I'm saying. But I do hope we
That
get there. Yep.
that's something that I feel like we could argue for ages, but no,
We don't have to.
I
Yeah,
think,
yeah. We
yeah,
we can
for
get
the
into that
sake
in
of
a
the
little bit.
argument, let's just continue on. Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to you being around the campfire with your friends, and you're spurring these philosophical discussions because you're taking an interest in them. Now, the thing is, you mentioned conscious choices, and I guess that is a good distinction to make. Conscious decision making versus unconscious choices. Now, I do think
Yeah.
unconscious choices are still choices. Often they are choices we made consciously as kids, and then they became habits over time, and they just became part of our personality, right?
Right.
But I would say, so for example, I did make conscious decisions to ask questions in ways that other people didn't. And you made conscious decisions to disagree with your teachers when other people would not. Those were extraordinary
Yeah.
decisions, right? Because for most people, disagreeing with authority figures, they might do it initially as kids because they're curious and they want to learn. And then if they get um, sort of shot down enough times, then they learn to ask less questions. And then I think even their creativity gets constrained, their curiosity gets constrained, and even unconsciously they begin to generate less questions because they can't ask as many questions. So the fact that their self-expression is limited limits also their range of thinking, I would say. So again, to me, you asking and or disagreeing with teachers is an extraordinary choice. Again,
Hmm.
but I see that I haven't really convinced you that any of these are extraordinary choices. So I'm thinking
No,
more so.
I can understand what you mean in the sense that they're against the status quo, I guess.
Sure, yeah, they're not the norm, and they even represented times when you took risks, right? They could have hurt you. There was downside. There were things that other people would have been afraid of, and maybe you were worried about them or you weren't worried about them, but you made the choice anyway. And it's those
Hmm.
choices I'm interested in because it's sort of a successful cascading series of choices like that that turn somebody who may seem unextraordinary as a person into somebody who has built great habits or success or has done extraordinary things and all this, right? Because I want to show listeners that people who achieve amazing things didn't get there overnight, and they didn't do it because of great genetics or great
That's
upbringing,
fair.
or wealth. Like those things can help, but they're not the breaking point. Many times they actually overcame hardship and they made difficult choices in situations where other people would have accepted the situation. They chose to do something
Hmm.
about the situation. So I guess my question for you is, can you think of any situation where you chose to stand out or brave ridicule or to do something, say something, try to change a situation for the better where around you people were just accepting the situation?
Hmm. Damn, that is a tough question. Um, no, honestly.
No worries. I understand. It kind of puts you on the spot. It is a difficult question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying though, but nah, nothing's coming to mind at all.
Yeah. So I'm learning in real time. I'm realizing as we go that probably the best is actually to let you tell stories. And in the stories, I'm sure I will spot moments for these and then I can dig deeper.
Hmm.
So you like camping with your friends, you do it 1 to 2 times a year. Let's go back a little bit. You talked about your early schooling. Your mom could really see. What age were you when your mom saw that you really hated the school system?
Oh, quite young. I remember being in primary school, I think.
Okay,
Um,
what is that, like 8 years old
uh,
maybe?
it was, yeah, I would say it was somewhere between 7 and 11.
Okay. And today you're 20 years old,
That's right.
right? Okay, so that was 13 to like 9 years ago. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
not that long ago when you think about
Not
it.
that long at all. Yeah. 13 years ago, I would have been, I'm 27 now, so I would have been 14 years old.
Far out.
So yeah,
How different you must have been back then too.
yeah. But it's funny because we're different, but we're also the same, right? Like I've heard of this idea. Who was it? Mel Robbins or someone was talking about like we do new stuff for the first 10 years of our life, and then we start repeating the same patterns well into adulthood until we address and fix them and change them. Uh, which is an interesting idea that we're kind of just reliving our childhoods over and over again in the way we think and act. And you could probably ask your mom, and she'll tell you that the personality she sees in you today, she saw in you when you were already 6, right? Like Jordan Peterson talks about this in his kids too. He already could see their personality when they were 5 years old, how his
Hmm.
son was more disagreeable and would not do things he didn't want to do, um, you know, things like that. His daughter was
Surely
more.
that very the
Mhm.
fact that you're saying that people originated well, that people retain some similarities that you could then track
Mhm.
and well keep track of as they got older shows that um, these extraordinary decisions, um, well, some of the contributing factors to these extraordinary decisions originate from a very very young age.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and like you said before, I don't mean to argue against your point, but I want you, you to have the opportunity to be able to reinforce it so that um, so that the idea becomes more robust. Um, so the very fact that these contributing factors are built from such a young age surely means or suggests that even that upbringing does have a contributing factor to these extraordinary decisions that people make, even if it is um, a variable that occurs such a long time from the extraordinary decision itself. It's a contributing factor, right?
Hmm. I do agree. By the way, you're not helping me reinforce my point. I think you've just brought up a very good counter argument to my point, right? Which is why I'm not attached to my point at all. I'm actually willing to change it and build it to be better, right? To be more true, to be more accurate. So I think you're right. Upbringing is a massive feature. So maybe what I need to clarify or try to I don't know fix up about this idea of extraordinary choices is that everybody has an upbringing to contend with, right? A unique upbringing, whether it was amazing or not amazing. And funnily enough, it's like it's hard to correlate um, privilege or say, being brought up really well with success because a lot of people who succeed actually had to overcome really hard, childhoods. Like David Goggins, you and I have both read his book, Can't Hurt Me, right? You
Mm-hmm.
you know what he went through as a child. His dad was a pimp, abused his mom, crime in the family, lots of issues. He had a learning disability. He was picked on, and it was through overcoming these things and making difficult choices that he became a better person. And I'm sure you know of many people who had everything in life. They had wealth, resources, opportunities, connections. They had a good upbringing, and yet they stultified, right? They got stuck. They failed. They self sabotaged. Things happened,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't able to overcome them. And so I don't. It's not so clear to me. It is clear to me that upbringing has an impact. It's not so clear to me that we can always say that it will be a positive or negative impact. And I'm trying to figure out where's the difference maker. Is it the person's choices or is it something else? And currently, I am leaning towards it being a person's choices. And however, I do think parenting and schooling have a massive impact. Like, I do think, unfortunately, our current parenting and schooling causes a lot of people to, because I actually think kids are naturally very rational and curious. And by rational, what I mean is that they're able to change their mind, they're able to fail, they're able to learn when they're wrong, they're able to not let emotions like shame or fear or embarrassment or anxiety stop them from making mistakes and learning and improving until we teach them to be ashamed and to be afraid and to be anxious and to be worried and to want to fit in, right? Because think about the kid, like think about how complex a skill learning to walk is. And the kid who's willing to
Hmm.
fall on their face over and over again. And their parents, of course, offer them encouragement and they improve. And it's funny that we encourage our kids better than we encourage ourselves, right? Because we start to beat ourselves up. But with our kids, it's a chance to start anew and to realize the value of encouragement and helping them fail repeatedly until they succeed. So kids learning to walk is an amazing skill. That kids are amazing at learning. Uh, but then we teach them irrationality. We teach them how to be afraid of authority. We teach them how to become emotional about being wrong rather than valuing finding out they're wrong and learning from it. Because by default, kids are actually so I don't know how to put it, but they're so open minded.
Hmm.
They have so few preconceived notions, and even when they build preconceived notions, they change them very quickly. And I don't think this is just a matter of neurology or neuroplasticity. I think it is really a matter of the fact that they have not learned the ideas that we as a society instill in each other and our
That's
kids
right.
to
That's
make them afraid.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the argument that I was going to make is that the parents don't necessarily instill them those ideologies, but um,
Yeah.
if the society that we live in um, shows repercussions of
Hmm.
not being afraid of authority figures, then naturally people are going to be afraid of authority figures because they don't want those repercussions.
Right.
Um, or even if a parent does instill them, it's not because they agree with those ideologies. It's out of sorry, hold on one second. Um, it's almost as though it could be out of fear because they want to protect their child from those repercussions.
Hmm.
So if a parent teaches their child to be withdrawn
Hmm.
and with around authority figures, then it's not because they want to train them not to oppose people or be oppose people or stand up for themselves to be steadfast.
Hmm.
It's because they're afraid of what might happen um, outside of the variables they can control.
Right.
So assuming that the parent can control the child, then but not the authority figure, then they will change the way that the child should interact with external stimulus based on the fact that based on the unpredictability of external stimulus, that is the authority figures, for
Right.
example.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I completely agree. I never think that parents do these with, well, sometimes they do it with bad intentions. Jordan Peterson talks about that, right? Like sometimes parents can really, in 12 Rules for Life, he does talk about how there's a chapter about parenting somewhere in there. He discusses things like how parents can really resent their children or hate them in a real way psychologically and want to harm them psychologically, and it's more common than we think. Um, because the child can feel like a burden. It can feel like the child is throwing a tantrum specifically to hurt the parent and things like that, right?
Right.
So then the parent takes that personally and they don't know how to deal with it. So they lash back and then they punish the child later. For example, if the child throws a tantrum in public, then the parent will withdraw love in private later as a form of retribution. And they won't even do
Mm-hmm.
this consciously, right? It's kind of like a silent treatment in a relationship, right? You might do it with
Mm-hmm.
your mom or dad or girlfriend or whatever, and it just happens. And maybe on self reflection, you're like, wait, why did I do that? That was kind of harmful both to me and to the other person. It didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, for kids, I think we have a lot to learn from them. And I do think that all these evils we're talking about are just perpetuated by a lack of knowledge, right? Parents just don't know better. But I'm hoping they're improving generation by generation. Like my dad wasn't the best parent, but I don't blame him because he didn't know better. He came from a culture where that was normal, right? Like beating your kids was normal. Um,
Yeah.
things like yelling at them was normal. Things like being the king of the household as the dad in an Indian household is very common. So
Of
ordering people
course.
around, status and authority. So if his status
All
or
around the
authority,
world, I'd say that's the case. That's the norm.
I'd say more in Western culture we are becoming more um, progressive and equal minded. Where
Maybe now, but I
maybe
still
now,
think that the
in the
concept of
past,
the man of the house is ever present.
true, yeah, and also the woman, the matriarch. I mean, there are matriarchal societies, right? I'm thinking of maybe black households. There are many where the grandmother is the matriarch and she actually rules with an iron fist, right? It's kind of interesting. Um,
That is a good point.
yeah. So, but the idea is still the same. Is that there's because to me the idea of a good family. I think this idea comes from David Deutsch. By the way, I should also give full credit to the philosopher Elliot Temple for these ideas about um, like parenting and schooling being broken. That's where I learned about them. But I don't understand. Like I should say he wouldn't endorse the way I'm saying them probably because I'm sure I'm getting things wrong and I'm misunderstanding them
Hmm.
because they are like he's done a lot of deep thinking about them and written about them in detail. Um, and I'm just familiar with them because I like reading about them. It's not that I've thought deeply enough to accurately convey them. That's just a disclaimer
Hmm.
for anyone listening. Don't take my words as well reasoned.
Gospel.
Yeah, don't take it. I mean, never take anyone's word as gospel, right? But for what I'm saying here, especially, just know that my thinking is probably low quality on it compared to the best thinking out there. And I think Elliot Temple's thinking is far closer to the best thinking out there than mine is. That's what I'm saying. Um, but I remember one thing David Deutsch wrote about that made sense to me at the time was something like in a rational family, you should be able to flip the power hierarchy. So flip all of the legal power, financial power, physical power from the parents to the children, and that family should still make the same decisions. And if it doesn't, then you know that that family is not making rational decisions.
Wow, that's a big statement you've just made there.
It is, yeah.
I mean, well,
You want me to break it down more?
I just okay, yeah, break it down a bit more.
Okay,
Let's talk through this.
right. Okay. So philosophy does teach us that appeals to authority are not valid ways to justify an idea, right? So
What's not valid ways to justify an idea, sorry?
appeals to authority. So basically, because I say so, or because I'm the parent, this is true, or do what I say,
Yep.
or anything, or
Okay.
because I'm the church, you should listen to me and believe that the earth is at the center of the universe, not the sun, right?
Right.
Um, so the rational enlightenment in the 1700s basically led to us learning and really formalizing this idea that we should judge an idea by its content, not its source. So whether a king or a homeless guy is telling you something, or a beggar, whoever, right? Like, or a janitor, it doesn't matter. It's the idea that matters. So the king could be wrong, the janitor could be right, right? Whoever it is.
Hmm.
Um, so you shouldn't look at the source of an idea. You should look at its content. And
Yep.
still today, many of us get this wrong. I get it wrong all the time. I look at the pedigree of an author and things like that when I should be looking at the idea itself and thinking for myself.
Absolutely.
But so this idea that David Deutsch proposed about the family is that in a family, if the decisions are being made because of the threat of financial power, the threat of taking love away from a child, the threat of legal power, the threat of physical power, if decisions are being made because of power rather than because of like mutual discussion and people believe it's a win-win, it's a good decision, right? It's a rational understanding of why it's good, then something is going wrong, right? Because then ideas are being instituted based on authority, not by their content, not by the quality of the idea or the result it might get.
Hmm.
And so,
But even
yeah.
then, you can argue that,
Hmm.
well, I suppose my initial objection to the idea
Hmm.
was based on the fact that having an authority figure make the decisions has merit because
Uh-huh.
you let the child of a parent make the financial decisions for the entire family, and that child has not nearly as much experience,
Hmm.
or 100 different other variables that like self-centeredness, or
Hmm.
all these different factors that someone who's older has had the opportunity to gain,
Hmm.
um, that allowing the authority figure to make these decisions, yeah, has merit, because it's that person's been trialed and tested, and so they should, in theory, have more experience and make a better judgment than the other people in the family.
Right. I absolutely agree, but they shouldn't be doing that based on authority. They should be doing it based on competence and effectiveness, right? And I view those as different from authority, distinct.
Okay.
So the idea is authority. So here's the thing, right? Because actually, kids, for the most part, if you look at it, kids will let their parents make the vast majority of decisions. Kids don't disagree with their parents on many things, right? Like kids are perfectly fine letting their parents decide the budget and handle the bank accounts and all that. Kids aren't aware of it, or even if they are, they're like, I don't want to deal with that. I'll focus on other things. But
Mm-hmm.
what I'm kind of saying is that when a disagreement does arise between a child and a parent, the parent should not assume that they're right, which is unfortunately what often happens. The parent does assume that they're right, um, because it reminds me. Oh, I'm trying to remember this like Godwin quote. I think it was William Godwin, maybe. There was some quote about like basically the times when someone uses violence or force or the threat of violence to, which is also a kind of force, right? To
Mm-hmm.
to bend me to their will, it is because they know that they cannot convince me with reason. They cannot
Mm-hmm.
persuade me with words. And
Yeah,
so
it's like the idea that shouting is a sign of weakness.
right, yeah, that's a similar idea as well, right? So when you need to force your child to do something or yell at them or threaten them, it actually shows a failing in your ability to understand and persuade them and figure out what their concerns are. Why are they disagreeing? Why are they concerned?
Mm-hmm.
So
It's important to make a distinction between
yeah.
shouting and threatening physical violence, and the point that you made earlier of
Hmm.
the parent should not consider they should consider the fact that they could be wrong. That's what you said earlier. Is that right?
Yes. So anytime there's a disagreement, they shouldn't assume that they're right, is what I'm saying.
Of course,
Yeah.
but you should make a distinction between, because I feel like we kind of jumped a step
Okay.
and we went
So how are
parents.
they distinct? Okay. So basically, so one is a method for solving a disagreement, right? So yelling, shouting, all these things, they're methods to resolve a disagreement from the parent.
Okay.
And the other is, I guess, an approach to the discussion in the first place. But
Hmm.
it's
That
usually
doesn't necessarily lead to that.
it doesn't necessarily lead to that. They can do all sorts of things. They can choose to. So okay, let's look at it this way. If a parent assumes that they're right, what how far are they willing to go to then solve the problem as quickly as possible, meaning with the least wasted time and energy?
With the least wasted time and energy to properly solve the problem, because I think that's where the crux of the problem
To
lies,
properly solve
is
problem.
what you define as the problem being solved. So
Right.
let's say that a child is disagreeing with their parent, and the parent says, or the child says, why? And the parent says, because I said so.
Hmm.
The question is whether or not that is truly solving the problem or not.
Right.
Because if it is, then that is the least amount of effort um, that's necessary by a parent to
Right.
quote unquote solve the problem.
Yeah. So that's a good point you're making because one good question to ask is what should a parent's standard be for solving a problem? Because for many parents, it just means making it past the next 5 minutes of like, because think about it, they're kind of stressed. They're like, oh, the kid doesn't want to put on his clothes to go to school. I just need to get them in the, on the school bus before it leaves, kind of thing, right? So to them, solving the
Mm-hmm.
problem is just forcing the clothes on the kid, putting them on the bus, and then breathing a sigh of relief and going to work, because they have to
Yep.
get to work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're not able to they kind of don't have the space in their life um, to consider the long-term consequences of what they just did necessarily. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they can reflect on it later and try to figure something out and build a system to solve it, but You get the idea that to them that's the solution. And it may be, unfortunately, it may be the best solution given the constraints at the time, right?
Hmm.
There were time constraints and all these other pressures. But I think most parents underestimate just how harmful uh, continually using authority can be on a child's development and growth as a human being.
Hmm.
Because every time that they do that, they should realize that they are investing in the wrong kind of relationship with their child and also building up the wrong idea um, of how their child should be learning. Because the child gets the message and learns that it's not about who's right; it's about who's powerful.
Hmm. Well, let me counteract that argument
Sure.
with an example of a parent who's um, talking to their adolescent, their
Mm-hmm.
teenage child, right? Um, the child wants to go out and party for the night or something like that, and
Sure.
she says, he or she says, um, why are you doing this? And the parent um, doesn't necessarily. I feel like it wouldn't necessarily be wrong for the parent to not. Um, Hold on, let me rephrase this. Um, I think in that context, being able to acknowledge that you could be wrong might not necessarily be beneficial because um, from my little knowledge and just based off of personal anecdote and anecdotal experience, um, teenagers when they are presented with the lack of um, I want to say authority
Mm-hmm.
or strong authority or strong structure,
Sure.
they will rebel and they will take that opportunity to further their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the example of the teenager who wants to go out and party for the night, and the parent who knows that this is either unsafe or irresponsible or whatever it is. Um, the parent, my argument is that the parent has merit in not showing the child that the parent's idea could be wrong, because if they do that, then the child will take advantage of that idea and then kind of just keep pushing it and try and get what they want and then argue that, oh well, you've just said that you could be wrong, etc., right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah, I guess I'm trying to show an exception to the rule that
Mm-hmm.
parents um parents being able to admit that they're wrong is not necessarily always the best way to go about it.
Okay, so there were many points that you made there. I'll try to address each of them if I can hold them in my mind. I feel like I may forget some, but I'll
Yeah.
do my best with it. So one is you seem to use the wording, the parent knows that it's irresponsible, knows that it's
Okay.
wrong for the child to go to this party. Um,
Right.
but the key thing about fallibility and what I've been talking about, Karl Popper's philosophy, all of this is that the reason to believe that you could be wrong is not just so you can express that to the other person, but so that you can genuinely approach the discussion knowing that you could be wrong, right? So if you know that this
Hmm.
party is bad for the child, you've already failed as a parent in my book, right? Like you've already failed not just as a parent but as a philosopher, as a
Hmm.
person trying to improve at life, as a person trying to make effective decisions. That is already like a mistake in my view. That would be an
Hmm.
error to be corrected. Now the second part is you mentioned the child pushing for their agenda and taking advantage, and you basically frame this as a very adversarial relationship, a very like win lose zero sum game. I'm negotiating against you, and if I win, like for me to benefit, you have to lose, and vice versa. Whereas I think a parent child relationship, the agenda of the child is the agenda of the parent, right? With maybe some additions or removals or like modifications from the parent's perspective, but they're two people both trying to accomplish similar goals for each other and themselves, right? Like
What do you mean by for each other and for themselves? Well,
what I mean is that
I
the parent wants the child to grow up to be successful, fulfilled, happy. They also want them in the moment to be happy. Like no parent wants their kid to be depressed, right, or sad or
Okay.
unhappy.
Yeah.
Um, they also want their kid to like develop skills or be whatever it might be, right? Whatever you might think a
Hmm.
parent wants for their child, and whatever you might think a child wants for their parent, because even a teenager does not want their parent to be sad or to die or to suffer, right? Like they want them to succeed in some ways, and they may want to help them or other things. The idea is that it's a relationship, right? It's like um, you and a friend, if you think about it. It's a
Okay.
relationship between two human beings. Now, I think the reason teenagers are portrayed the way they are in media and the way that we think of them as rebellious and all that, because here's one thing, I like I was the kind of person to actually rebel the more structure was placed on me and the more authority was pushed on me, and you can probably relate to that yourself as well,
Absolutely.
right? And I think that is human nature to some degree, or it's very common in our culture because you don't want to be controlled. You want liberty, autonomy, freedom. You want to make your own decisions. It's
Hmm.
similar to that thing of like, I'm about to wash the dishes, and then my mom tells me you should wash the dishes. And then I'm like, well, now I don't want to wash the dishes, right? But I was going to. That kind of thing. I know a lot of people can relate
Hmm.
to that idea. Um,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's because you would rather do the right thing of your own volition than do the right thing because somebody told you it. And now you feel
Yeah.
like, well, it's no longer in your control. You just have to do it because they told you. They gave you an order, right? So that's kind of why I would just want to do whatever I can as a parent in that situation to express my concerns. I would say, like, hey, I feel like it's dangerous. There will be drinking. I'm worried that, you may be pressured into driving drunk or driving with someone who's drunk. We've discussed this. Please, that you can always give me a call and I'll come give you a ride, or, here's money for a taxi or an Uber, whatever it is, right? You can always do this for the safety thing. Basically, bring up your concerns and try to address them in a rational way rather than just assuming that your concerns are reason enough to deny the person the chance to do something that they want to do, right? Because if you instead say you're grounded, you can't go to the party, I forbid you, they'll climb out the window and go to the party anyway. And then you're going to blow up and have an argument later that night when they come home, like, or in the next morning when you find out, whatever it is, right? And those are the things that lead to a poor relationship over time. And I would say that it has to begin early, right? Like, you if you already have a terrible relationship with your teenager that is low trust and you're already trying to control them and already think you know what's best for them and their life, it's going to be pretty hard. It'll take a lot of work, let's say, from you to repair it and rebuild it the way it should be. That's why it has to
Hmm.
start early. You have to view your child as an autonomous individual who has rights, who is an individual. Like, they have liberty. They like their desires. You need to view them as like respectable.
Hmm.
So I guess I can maybe detail or summarize two relationship philosophies. One is this idea of I know what's best for the other person in the relationship, and I will help them change to become that person that I think is better for them or for me or whatever, right? I will help them be better in that way. Now, the second way, which I prefer personally, but is less common, is to say I'm going to work with the other person to figure out what they want, and then I'm going to help them get what they want. And I'm going to do that again and again and again. And their wants will change,
Okay.
their goals will change, but I'll keep helping them and I'll keep diagnosing with them and figure out what they want. And the idea is that kind of, and I'll also ask them for help with what I want to achieve, and they'll help me get what I want. And the idea with that second philosophy is that you no longer assume that what someone else wants is wrong or that you know better what they should want than they do. Instead, you build it on the assumption that what they want is good for them, and if it's not good for them and you help them get it, they'll discover that it isn't, right? You're basically trusting them and you're giving them some like real autonomy as a human being. So between adult to adult relationships, you can see how that makes sense, but I
Hmm.
would argue that that is good even between adults and children, because what are children if not future adults?
Of course, but they aren't adults yet, and that's where the debate lies.
Sure, but I'm kind of
Should they be
saying,
given that level of autonomy?
right.
If you give a child or a teenager that level of autonomy, there will there can be very dangerous repercussions for that. And and at the end of the day, giving them that level of responsibility, or sorry, giving them that level of freedom and autonomy, if something bad happens, it isn't the child's responsibility, it's the parent's responsibility.
Hmm. I agree. It is
So,
on the parent, yeah. And that's why, to me, it's not about giving them autonomy or freedom. They have autonomy and freedom already. They have as much autonomy and freedom as their arms and legs and minds give them, right? Like you're not chaining them to the bedpost. You're not shackling them to the. Although a lot of parents do emotionally shackle their children, kind of like we
mhm,
shackle ChatGPT, right? It's not allowed to explore certain avenues of
that's a
discussion.
crazy analogy.
But
Continue.
yeah, because for example, David Deutsch has talked about artificial general intelligence being not just analogous to a teenager, but actually literally a teenager, because it would be a child, it would have our culture, it would have to learn ideas and whatnot. So if we were to shackle an artificial general intelligence and tell it that it cannot think certain things or it cannot have certain values, then it would be akin to slavery of the mind, right? And in a way, we do that emotionally with our children in our culture. We we make them feel religion does this to people as well, right? It makes them feel guilty for certain thoughts. Like if you start to question whether God exists or not, and the religious ideas make you feel guilty about that or ashamed, and you feel like you need to punish yourself or atone,
Mhm.
or whip, lashes to your back. I've actually, yeah, there are the people who actually do that. It's insane to me that that still happens, but it does happen. Um, that people
What
want,
exactly happens?
like
People whip
people whip
themselves.
themselves across the back when they have sinful thoughts. So
Oh my
it's
god.
a very real kind of effect where that's what I mean by, so there are certain strands of thinking that reinforce themselves. David Deutsch calls these static memes, but they reinforce themselves by making you feel negative emotions so that you don't question them. And then dynamic memes are ideas that spread more so by being useful, and they spread across the population and through minds. Static memes spread more by reinforcing themselves in sort of negative ways. They suppress criticism of themselves, and they might make you do things like beat yourself up, emotionally or physically. So
I don't understand how beating yourself up
yeah,
would sorry, what did you say? It would stop
stop what?
emotional thinking, something like that?
No, so suppress criticism of the idea itself.
Okay.
So for example, you have, say, strong religious ideas, and they make you feel shame or guilt or fear or anxiety when you start to question the existence of God. So
Right.
to
And so you're
counteract that,
punishing yourself, which means that you would start thinking that less.
yeah, or you don't even have to physically punish yourself. For many people, it just, they start to suppress the thinking, or they might bring it up with someone, and then someone will shame them, whatever it might be. Like if you're in a
Mhm.
static culture, um, it basically becomes hard to learn. It becomes hard to change your mind. That's again
I
why I
see.
think free speech and free thought are so important, right? Because
Absolutely.
if you can't, but I know this seems like a tangent. We can go back to the thing about,
No, I absolutely agree, and I also think that that's the danger
yeah,
of well, my background is in marketing, and so
hmm,
I have a very well, I've discussed this topic a lot in the context of social media, for example,
yes,
and so um, the danger is not only in the punishing of certain thoughts and ideologies, or sorry, of the punishing of free speech, but
hmm,
also the danger is in the the opposite of which is the echo chamber concept, right? Where
right,
people are constantly being surrounded with the the same ideologies that they agree with, and it can be dangerous because it can reinforce things that don't necessarily have merit. I
I
want to say I need to tread my I need to be very deliberate with what I'm saying here. But uh, yeah, I guess the danger is that if an idea isn't truly being reinforced with logic, but it's just being reinforced because you keep hearing it over and over from multiple people,
hmm,
there can be danger in that. Um, there can definitely also be merit, but definitely danger as well. And so the idea of the danger of the echo chamber is that um, it's not what you're seeing isn't an accurate representation of the world around you. It would be an accurate representation of the community that you're involved with, not necessarily even following. For example, um, a lot of these social media platforms are now using algorithms to predict things that you might like and then deliver you content based on that, right? And so you get content that you may not necessarily uh, actively search out, but it still appears in your feed anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's appearing without you searching it out makes you believe that that's an accurate representation of the world around you.
Right, but it's customized to you. It's tailored to your preferences. It's meant to make you click on it, right? It is
Even
designed to.
tailored to your political views, for
Yes,
example. I
and that's why
mean,
the tribalization thing comes in, right?
if the absolute goal of a social media platform is to keep you using it as much as possible,
Yep.
they're going to try and give you as little content which you would disagree with as possible
Right.
because they don't want you to have negative experiences on the platform. They want you to only have positive experiences, and those only happen, well,
Well, yes and no. We
those
know
are
about.
much more likely to happen in the context of, well, by being given content that you already agree with or like.
Yes, I agree on a whole. Although we also know that social media platforms really do this thing called rage baiting, right? Where they understand that negative emotions do drive a lot more commitment and action. For example, arguing over politics in Facebook comments happens a
Yeah.
lot, right? And
Okay.
so so highly polarizing content that, because here's the thing, it's not that people so it is that people don't like their ideas being challenged, but they are drawn to the opportunity to vehemently disagree with something that triggers them, right? Something that really offends them. And they really
That's
need to
true.
comment. They need to take action. They need to do something about it because it is so egregious that they are seeing this thing and it's being presented as if it's true. And they're like, no, there's no way this is true.
hmm
I need to
But
fight
I
for it.
think that social media still,
Mhm.
now I could be wrong about this, because I think the point that you've just made is a very excellent point. But I feel as though um, social media would still not aim to deliver that content to the people. It still doesn't seem like it aligns with their goals to deliver that kind of content to people who would disagree with it very passionately.
Right.
I could be wrong. It just seems like I can't really articulate the reason why. So that's something that I'll definitely go and look into.
Well,
But
I think you're right. I
it
don't think
seems wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think they are trying to deliver that content to people specifically. So the kind of tailored content you're talking about by knowing about people's feeds and how they browse and showing content that agrees with them, that all happens. I think the reason these more polarizing pieces of content come to the forefront of people is because they have higher engagement metrics, right? So polarizing content will have uh, more comments than non-polarizing content because people want to say
Yeah.
something about it. So political videos, you'll
But
often
I
see.
think that the algorithms are quite good at filtering that sort of stuff out. I mean, if you look at Reddit, for example, you can filter by controversial.
Right.
And generally controversial comments or posts
Mm-hmm.
do not appear in your feed unless you're actively searching them out. So if you filter by all the other different metrics that they use on Reddit, like hot or top or
Rising. Yeah.
yeah,
Or
rising
new.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, new maybe not so much,
You'll get
but
more
those
controversy. Yeah.
you'll definitely, yeah, you those metrics are very good at avoiding controversy, even despite the fact that controversial content has higher engagement. I
Mm.
think it's about the type of engagement that it's getting, and it's they're very good at filtering that out.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. I don't know how. I'm having trouble imagining how they filter out what type of engagement is controversial versus not, or polarizing versus not. But that's good to know. I know that you can
Which
use,
is
for
why I
example,
think that.
yeah, like and
Go
dislike
ahead.
ratios.
Mm,
You can use like, yeah.
that's true, but
Mhm.
not every platform, especially like a lot of social media platforms are straying away from dislikes. For example,
Right.
Reddit is an exception with the downvote button, but
Mhm.
Twitter tried it and they got rid of it. I'm not
And
exactly
YouTube has
sure
removed it as
why.
well, right?
YouTube
Or did they
No,
add it
they
back?
YouTube has the dislike button, but I think what they removed was
Is
the
the
ability
display.
to see
Mm.
both.
Right.
At the moment, you can dislike, but I think it only shows you the number of likes. I can just double check that now.
Right. So maybe this supports your point that the trend is we're moving away from negativity and we're focusing more on positivity or,
Yeah,
what people agree with. And then maybe that is creating a more toxic, positive environment of like, it's misrepresenting reality and the facts.
that's right. And
Right.
that's when the echo chambers begin to exist.
Right. And that's why I think ultimately the responsibility has to be on each individual. So, of course, if I was designing a social media platform or a discussion forum or something, I would want to take steps to design it differently. But ultimately, the responsibility lies on every individual to develop their own rationality and philosophy and ability to seek out where they're wrong, right? So, all this philosophy stuff I've been bringing up, one of the key tenets of it is like you need to look for where you're wrong before you look for where you're right. That makes sense, right? Like when you
Mm-hmm.
have an idea, you need to go in assuming that you're wrong and then be willing to be convinced you're right. And that will
Yeah,
counteract a lot of the biases that we often fall prey to,
that makes sense.
confirmation bias and other things. So, so for me, when I go on YouTube or other social media platforms, to some degree, I notice that I look more closely at the things that seem to agree with me, but then I also try to make an effort and try to like specifically Google, like criticism of X idea, and X idea is the idea I believe, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I find that helps me learn a lot better because I start to find out where I'm wrong um, more easily before I take on some idea and implement it. I look for, well, what are the downsides of this? Or how could it be wrong? What
Mm-hmm.
are some better alternatives, etc. But I realize most
Here's a
people.
question for you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, no, finish off your point because this is a bit of a segue, so go ahead.
It's more. I just realized most people don't do that. But again, I think that comes back to parenting and schooling, and I think kids are more naturally like that than most adults. So many adults will have to spend their lives sort of fixing themselves from the problems that school and parenting inflicted upon them, or made happen to them, because now they are responsible for whoever they are and for changing
That's
it or
true.
making changes. Yeah. So
But that is inevitable. I don't think that you can do anything to
mhm.
to stop that from happening.
Yeah. Just my last
People will
point
always
is yeah.
have to repair themselves, I feel like,
Yes
or
and
work on
no to some
themselves.
degree. Yeah, I think we could do a much better job not inflicting people with these burdens.
Of
Um,
course, but it doesn't mean that it's not gonna happen.
yeah, it'll still happen, just hopefully less often. I think of Feynman as an example of someone who, like, I looked at stories of how his dad raised him. He nurtured his curiosity, answered his questions. He even said things like, "I don't know the answer to that, but let's find out together," right?
Mm,
And Feynman ended up becoming one of the most effective physicists of his time, right? Potentially in all of history, and just a very knowledgeable and intelligent person in general. And I think we would have a
hmm
lot more people like Feynman running around if we had parenting that was better and schooling that was better,
Yeah,
less,
okay.
yeah, less broken. Anyway,
I can
what
agree
was
with
your
that.
segue? I don't want you to lose your train of thought.
No, 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 it's all right. In response to what you just said,
Hmm.
I think that that idea that we'll have more people like Feynman running around is exactly the concept of evolution, right?
Hmm.
Like we will become better at parenting and teaching,
Hmm.
and therefore our problems will become more complicated.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that the idea that we will be getting rid of the necessity to repair yourself or to work on yourself during your adult years is kind of, for lack of a better word, naive. Um, I think that it's inevitable, but that our problems will just get more complicated.
I agree.
Um,
So I
yeah.
think David Deutsch once defined knowledge or the process of creating knowledge as the process of converting problems into better problems, right? So I agree with
Yeah.
you. When we solve the problem of inflicting children with irrationality and bad ideas, they'll then have better problems to work on for themselves. But at least we won't be starting them out with a major sort of crutch or
Yeah.
disability that
Mm-hmm.
we've inflicted
Of
upon them.
course.
So
Yeah.
rather than having to repair themselves, it's more like they can do error correction in a more positive or aspirational sense, right? They can problem solve from a better baseline, I guess is what I'm saying. From the
Mm-hmm.
baseline that they were already born with, because that's what I mean is that we really set our children back. It's not just that we don't give them the tools to improve. It's that I don't know how to put it. We almost cripple them basically, emotionally, psychologically, rational, like idea wise, philosophically, and then they have to
Mm-hmm.
undo a lot of it. And unfortunately, a lot of people just never undo it in their lifetime. They
That's very true.
it sucks, but it is what it is. And I've been struggling for the last 5+ years to try to identify and undo these things, but it's not a there's no like blueprint, there's no map. It's different for each person, and they kind of have to
Absolutely.
navigate it
Yeah,
themselves. Yeah.
that's very true.
So that's
I think we'll wrap up with this point as well, by the way,
sure, sure.
because
No worries.
I do have to go soon.
I understand. Yeah, yeah.
This question:
Sure, sure. Go ahead.
uh, do you believe that it's evil for social media companies to deliver content that their users
One.
that users are more likely to agree with?
Not
Do you believe
necessarily.
that's evil?
No, not necessarily. I think that any company giving people what they want is not something I would consider evil, right? Because I
But you can also do that in an ethical way. So, for example,
yeah,
this is very biased, by the way.
sure, sure.
But let's in my personal experience, let's use Twitter as an example.
Yeah.
I feel like Twitter is delivering me content that I occasionally do not agree with, um, in order to give me a more rounded, I guess, um, perception of the kinds of tweets that I subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
and ultimately, that makes my experience on Twitter better because that's what I'm using it for, right?
Right.
I'm not using it to get things that I already agree with.
Right.
Um, Now, this is all very subjective, so definitely, obviously, take it with a grain of salt. But if this platform is able to do that in a quote unquote ethical manner, then surely other companies can follow suit, other social media platforms.
Yes, if it is effective, if it makes them more money, right? If it fulfills their mission better, their vision of what they're trying to accomplish better, then yes, they will follow suit. Because if what Twitter is doing is better for
Hmm.
their goals, then it's an innovation. And I don't know if it's
Right.
disruptive enough to force Facebook and other platforms to follow suit, because what it may be is just a different style, a different vision, right?
That's right.
Because so I don't think that what Facebook and other places are doing is evil so much as it may be misguided, or like for example, if you believe that they are not even fulfilling their own goals as well as they could be, because if they show you just a little bit of topics you disagree with, then you'll have a better experience. And if that's true for everyone, not just you, right, including the people who want to be lied to or who want to be biased, um, if you think that will enhance their experience as well and make them use the platform more or enjoy it better in the long run, then I would agree that not so much that they're evil, but that they are ineffective or less
Hmm.
effective than they should be, suboptimal, rather.
I suppose the point is that
Hmm.
perhaps it doesn't make their platform better by implementing such a system,
Yeah,
and maybe that in turn makes their platform evil.
I see. So you're saying their lack of action to optimize and improve ethically
Mm,
makes them evil?
No,
No.
no to that. Um, I think that the platform itself being, if their success is based on delivering people content strictly which they subscribe to,
Mm-hmm.
then perhaps you could argue that their platform is evil
Mm,
because it's
I see.
because it's creating these echo chambers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that Twitter isn't, but for the sake of the argument,
Sure.
this is what I'm asking.
No, so I don't think giving people what they want is evil, right?
Hmm.
In fact, I think you're performing a service for people. So even the tobacco companies who make cigarettes, I think what might be evil is how they market it to new customers and young kids and all that. But I don't think it is evil to deliver cigarettes to people who are looking for cigarettes, like
Really?
adults. Yeah, adults who are autonomous who are looking for cigarettes. Because the alternative would be to ban all cigarettes, right? And then
Hmm.
what what do people who want cigarettes do? Because in a way, do they have to like craft their own cigarettes by hand, or maybe I don't know. But then some small business will come up that is then crafting cigarettes by hand for them, right? So
Right.
that's kind of my point: is giving people what they want is not evil, unless of course you are doing immoral things to get there, like say you're enslaving people or something, right? Or you're trafficking human beings to then fulfill a sex trade market in some country, that would obviously be evil in my eyes. But for the most part, giving people what they want when it doesn't infringe on the autonomy of others is not evil, as far as I can tell. So if people want echo chambers, they want news that is delivered that they agree with, and a website is willing to do that for them, that's not evil.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, that's a big statement that you've just made. Like, let's think about, I mean, you could really push that statement to the limits. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say a meth dealer is creating and sourcing meth. So, like, like Breaking Bad, for example. I
Yeah.
mean, would you say that that's because that there's been a lot of debate about whether or not Walter White was evil, for example. But like,
Mm.
let let's kind of stray the example away from that. I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but
No worries.
someone is making methamphetamine and giving it to people, consenting adults who want methamphetamine.
Mm-hmm.
Is that evil?
I think it gets tough with drugs, right? Like when we talk about
Right.
heroin and other things, it does get
But
tough.
what's the difference
But
then
but I do
between
think there is no
providing an
fundamental
echo chamber and a
difference.
drug then?
No, I think there is no fundamental difference. So like if consenting informed adults want to engage in heroin or meth or things like that, um, should we really should we really stop them? Should we really say, well, no, this is bad for you, don't do it? Because then we're being the parents, right? We're being the sort of nanny government or whoever saying to people, this is what you can and cannot put into your body. Because my dad has been smoking 40 plus years, and
Okay.
I've I've tried to help him quit multiple times with various methods.
Hmm.
I've tried to do research for him, but I also had to realize at some point that if he doesn't want to quit, he's not going to quit. And that's okay. Like I can't be the one pressuring him and forcing him and all these things because I'm not being morally better by trying to do that. Like he's living his life the way he believes best, right?
Hmm.
So I
But
think
then
it's yeah.
perhaps the legalization of something like cigarettes is meaning that your father was um, able to access it from a younger age and therefore led to his, you know,
Addiction.
addiction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but look at
And so,
mhm.
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, look at marijuana, look at all these. This is the same thing we discussed with teenagers, right? If you make something illegal, this applies to adults too. Like think about prohibition for booze and alcohol, right? Pro in
Everybody won't be able to supply it everywhere else, though. And so, if you're reducing the number overall, surely that is ethically right. And so, that's why governments do make things like drugs illegal in the first place.
but then they also legalize other drugs as they realize how widespread they're becoming and how much they stand to gain from taxing them, such as marijuana, and what the industry potential is. The other thing is that when you have drugs being illegal, they get tainted and cut with worse materials, and the quality control is worse. It's poorly regulated, so the health risks are higher. So,
Right.
and I think that it's wrong to say that it's ethical to reduce the consumption of alcohol or cigarettes by any means necessary, such as by mandating laws and controlling people, because we should be very careful when and how we choose to control people, right, and control their lives and their individual decision making. Because every time
But
that we
then with that argument,
Mhm.
sorry to
Go ahead,
interrupt
sorry.
you. With that argument, then you're basically saying that we should legalize methamphetamine and heroin.
Potentially. What I would want to explore is like why do we have the problems with addiction as a society that we do, and how can we try to address them? Because a lot of the successful rehab initiatives, I think we talked about the book Influencer, and Mimi, I forgot her name, Mimi Silbert, and her halfway house basically, and how they handled drug addiction and things
Hmm.
like that, right? And
Yeah.
basically, one of so she had a no drug rule, for example, right? So maybe that supports your argument. But the way I think about it is like people are going to find ways to access drugs or guns or whatever else you want to ban one way or another. And one of the best ways to help them is to try to solve the root cause of it rather than trying to just ban the import of those drugs or the like. I think there was even weird stuff with the CIA, like profiting from the cocaine import trade despite
Hmm.
illegalizing it and things like that. So it's to me, it's like how can we make it safe, effective, controlled, right? Like even if you look at hallucinogenic usage, LSD
Yep.
and psilocybin, people are finding
Hmm.
psychological and benefits for solving PTSD and other issues like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah.
But doing it in a medical environment where someone can measure dosage and try to help you if something goes wrong is way better than doing it on the street where you've
Mm,
overpaid for it. It could be cut with other things. You're using maybe not the cleanest equipment and things like that. So
right.
that's why
But
Mhm.
the reason why you're making the exception there is that there's health benefits there, right?
Right.
And so if there isn't health benefits with using drugs, certain drugs,
Mhm.
then do you agree that they shouldn't be legal?
No, I think there are better solutions. Like, remember when you said there's a more elegant solution for the teacher banning my questions in class?
Mm-hmm.
I
You
think
think
the
there's a
same.
more elegant solution than banning out drugs?
Yeah, I think there's a more elegant solution to banning out drugs. For example, we've discovered that MDMA is neurotoxic. It is destroying neurons in the brain. By the way, alcohol does that too, right?
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, okay.
But we've also found that MDMA has some positive qualities in terms of the experience people can have and the perception shifts. But basically, people should be able to make those choices for themselves. People like the experience they have on alcohol, so they drink it. But it is neurotoxic. It
Mm-hmm.
is a toxic chemical that is shortening people's lifespans, destroying their liver, right? Like all sorts of issues. But I would never say ban
Mm-hmm.
alcohol. And so I don't think we should ban heroin or meth.
My goodness. What
I,
a
I think we should find a better
what a
solution.
crazy take.
I think we should find a better solution. I think there
But
are.
I also think that that's
Yep.
um, without having a better solution to implement,
Hmm.
you can't just say let's legalize these drugs
Mm.
and then hope for the best. Do you know what I mean? You need a plan in place.
I agree. A
And
plan will
so
help. But you see the
if you don't
differences.
have
Yeah.
a solution, then how can you truly argue that there would be a benefit to to the legalization of such a thing?
What I'm arguing is that we've already paid a significant cost and continue to pay a significant cost every time that we ban a substance without trying to find a more elegant solution. So if you notice the key difference is that meth and heroin are already banned, but cigarettes and alcohol are not, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
think that that is skewing the discussion and how we're thinking about it. We should almost view them as like they're not banned or unbanned, and then we have to think about, well, why? What are the costs to banning any substance from people versus the benefits of allowing it? And I think just in general, prioritizing autonomy and individual liberty has a lot of social, like society-wide benefits that we shouldn't take for granted. Like that's part of what I think has made Western society so successful, that we try not to control people as much as we can, right? We
Mm-hmm.
try to avoid interfering in their lives. We try to let them live the way they think is best, and we only like enforce, laws and like trying to police disputes and having courts for legal disputes and things like that. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
think we aren't as free a society as we could or should be in the West, but I think we have done a great job, improving over the last 200 years or so.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah,
That last point,
yeah.
definitely.
By the way, I
All
do
right.
want to respect your time. I know you said you needed to go soon.
No, yeah, that's all good. I don't mind staying around, but yeah, I think it's time to wrap it up now, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate having you here. Thanks for the conversation. Is there anything you'd like to tell our listeners? Anywhere you'd like them to find you on social media or anything like that?
No, I don't feel like plugging my socials.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you to everyone who's listening. And yeah, by all means, if you do have feedback, um, let either of us know, because this is both my first time being on a podcast and your first time probably being on a podcast or making a podcast,
It is. Yeah.
hosting a podcast.
Both. Yeah.
Yeah, so would love to hear some feedback. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Of course, feedback would be great. And yeah, I appreciate your time. Have a great.
No worries.
I guess for you it's the morning, right? So have a great day. For me,
It's about to be afternoon, yeah.
okay, it's like
All
8 p.m.
right, see you later.
See you.